You know, the Korean War. It wasn't just fought on the ground. It was a crucible, a real trial by fire, especially up in the sky. This is where the brand new United States Air Force had to answer a massive question, one that would literally define how air wars are fought for the next 70 years.
And this was the fundamental dilemma. In a modern war, who should be in charge of the planes? The generals on the ground or the generals in the air? Now, it sounds kind of simple, right? But the answer decides everything. We're talking which targets get bombed, what kind of weapons are used, and ultimately, who makes it home and who doesn't. The entire strategy for winning the air war depended on getting this right.
And look, this isn't some academic theory. The answer was learned the hard way, forged in the heat of combat, and it's all laid out right here in the official history of the Air Force in Korea. So let's dive in and see exactly how they figured this out. Okay, here's our game plan. First, we'll tackle the big question: who commands the sky? Then we'll see how that led to a war of priorities. Then comes the turning point, the moment someone said, "Run your own show." After that, we'll look at the results: centralized control, decisive force, and finally, we'll wrap it all up with the enduring Korean lesson. All right, let's jump right in. You gotta remember, in 1950, the U.S. Air Force was the new kid on the block. It was a brand new military service, and it had its own doctrine, its own very strong ideas about how to use airplanes to fight a war. But then the Korean War breaks out, and suddenly, they find themselves taking orders from Army generals who had, well, let's just say very different ideas about what planes are for. So picture this. The Air Force is officially born in 1947, built on this core belief that air power can be a decisive strategic weapon all on its own. But just 3 years later, bam, the Korean War starts. Their main command in the Pacific, the Far East Air Forces, or FEFAF, gets put under the command of Army General Douglas MacArthur. So in short, the air experts were taking their orders from a ground commander. And you can probably guess what happened next, right? It immediately created friction, a war of priorities. See, when a ground commander is in charge of the planes, their focus is, naturally, on the enemy right in front of their troops, their most immediate problems. And that makes sense for them, but that is not always the most effective way to win the larger war in the air. Let's take the B-29 Superfortress as a perfect example. This beast was the Air Force's premier strategic bomber. It was a long-range powerhouse designed to fly deep behind enemy lines and cripple their ability to even wage war by taking out factories, supply depots, and major infrastructure. So here's where the problem gets crystal clear. According to the official history, the ground command started ordering these massive B-29s to attack small tactical targets right on the front lines, a job they were absolutely not designed for. The air commander, General Partridge, could only report the results as unknown, which is a very polite military way of saying the missions were a total bust.
This just created strategic chaos. You had the wrong tool being used for the job, over and over again. Heavy B-29s were being completely wasted on tiny targets, while the lighter B-26 bombers were being sent to attack hardened bridges, a mission the B-29s were perfect for. It was a complete misapplication of assets, all driven by a command structure that just didn't get air power.
And this friction wasn't just about the B-29s. No, it went much deeper, to the very philosophy of air support. The Air Force and Army saw planes as a tool to hit targets way in the back that artillery couldn't dream of reaching. But the Marines, they used their planes as flying artillery, constantly circling overhead, ready to drop bombs sometimes just 1,000 yards in front of their own guys. Now, both are valid tactics, but trying to run both systems under one command that isn't an expert in either one, well, that just leads to a whole lot of inefficiency and confusion. So the situation was becoming completely unsustainable. The airmen knew they were fighting inefficiently, and something had to give. This all led to a pivotal confrontation that would end up changing the entire course of the air war. I mean, can you imagine it? You're an expert air commander, and you have staff officers with basically zero aviation experience telling you which planes to send to which targets? The official history says the frustration in FEAF was palpable. You could practically taste it. They knew there was a better way to fight, but they just weren't being allowed to do it. And this is the moment it all came to a head. Lieutenant General Stratemeyer, the commander of the Far East Air Forces, goes directly to the Supreme Commander, the legendary Douglas MacArthur, and he says this: "I am sure that it is not your intention to tell me how to do the job." Wow. That's not a suggestion. That's a direct challenge. He's drawing a line in the sand.
And to his incredible credit, MacArthur listened. He got it. He told Stratemeyer to run his show as he saw fit. And that was the turning point. Right there, in the middle of a war, this vital principle was established. The air commander should command the air war.
So what did this change actually mean on the battlefield? What were the results of having an airman lead the air war? Well, they were immediate and they were decisive.
The new system was beautifully logical. The top general, MacArthur, still set the overall objectives. Take this hill, stop this advance. But now, a single air commander was in centralized control of all the air assets, Air Force, Navy, and Marine planes, and could use them in the most efficient way possible to get the job done. Then the pilots and local commanders in the air had the freedom to execute the mission. And this illustrates the impact perfectly. With an airman in charge, the #1 priority became winning control of the air. FEAF could now mass its best fighter aircraft, the F-16 Sabres, to go hunt and destroy enemy MiGs in the infamous MiG Alley. Gaining air superiority was the key that unlocked everything else. You can't effectively support your troops on the ground if your own planes are getting shot down all the time.
The benefits of this new unified approach were just immense. Instead of being scattered all over the place, air power could be concentrated where it mattered most. The right weapon was used for the right target, finally. It allowed for major strategic campaigns against enemy supply lines. And crucially, it reduced the friction between the different services. And at the end of the day, all of this meant much more timely and effective support for the guys on the ground.
Now, this hard-won lesson didn't just fade away after the Korean War ended. It became the absolute bedrock of U.S. air power doctrine, a fundamental principle that governs how the military fights in any complex, modern war today.
What was decided in that tense conversation between Stratemeyer and MacArthur has been formalized. Today, we call it the Joint Force Air Component Commander, or JFACC. In every major U.S. military operation since Korea, a single air commander is given centralized control over all the air assets in a theater, and they are tasked with using them to achieve the overall commander's goals.
And that is the ultimate takeaway here. The Korean War proved that air power isn't just flying artillery or a simple extension of the ground war. It is its own unique and complex domain of warfare. And to use it to its fullest, most devastating potential, it has to be commanded by the experts who live and breathe it. The doctrine born in Korea has been used to win battles for over 70 years. But it leaves us with a sobering thought, doesn't it? What was the cost of learning that lesson in the middle of a fight? You have to wonder how many missions were inefficient, how many resources were wasted, and how many lives were lost in those chaotic early months of the war before they finally figured out who should command the sky.